All right, everyone, welcome. It's the end of July and it's time to refresh our bounce back plans. We've been learning quite a lot, don't you think, over the last 5 months, living in real time with the impacts of COVID-19 and all of its repercussions on so much of our daily lives, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And so we'll spend a little time together kind of updating ourselves on the realities at hand, and then spend real time talking about reinvention and rediscovery to assist you in continuing to bounce back. I wish there was a reset button, don't you? We could all go back to March the 1st and kind of give ourselves another try at this, but wishing doesn't make it so. And today we'll spend some time just, again, kind of grappling with where we are and finding optimism and possibility in the future that we share. And so we'll talk a little bit about what I call the crisis trifecta. Hello? Yeah, we'll bring to life our customer zeitgeist, and then we are going to talk in detail about goals 1 and 2 of your bounce back plan as we go. Hi, Becky, welcome. So colleagues, welcome to the crisis trifecta. When we all found ourselves dealing with COVID-19, we quickly saw the impact on the economy. And of course, now we're also dealing with a social crisis as well. So we've got a pandemic, an economic, and a social crisis. Those of you who have been kind of tracking this with me since March, I have been creating for us all a real-time distortion index each week. My goal in this is to, quite frankly, run it as long as I can so that we can be cognizant of the language that's really describing our lives across all 3 of these components of our lived experience. Of course, this last week plus, we've been seeing increasing calls to end racism. We're dealing with supply shocks. That's when we don't have enough of key things that we need, such as the swabs to conduct tests and that sort of thing. And we've been living in real time with a grand experiment to move as much outside as possible. And as we think about the watchwords of our time through the distortion index, I've been tracking, again, really interesting language. And apocal is a term that really stood out for me because, one, it's not one you hear very often or get to use very often. And it was the recognition, this actually came up a few months ago, and it really struck me that we are living in a really unique era, and what that calls on us to do and be as leaders and members of our community and as civically engaged individuals to build the world that we want in the next normal. And it certainly is uncharted territory for those of us that are strategists and strategists who are committed to delivering on purpose. And so through the distortion index, I thought it'd be fun to share with you all. This is some of the language that I've been tracking over these many weeks. And it's been fun to see language that I haven't otherwise seen in a long time. I had not actually typed the term whack-a-mole before, so that was really kind of a fun one to be thinking about. And that actually came up from an epidemiologist talking about the challenge we have of battling COVID-19. And then you can see through the language here the kinds of things we've all been dealing with in terms of business on top, right? The idea that I'm going to be dressy on the top and I might be in jeans or my PJs on the bottom. And so many of us have been MacGyvering, right, as we've been trying to find real-time solutions in near-term opportunities amidst the challenge. I was struck as we think about this crisis trifecta. I was really struck by a poll that was released by the Wall Street Journal just last week about Americans' opinions around discrimination and racism. And I wanted to cite a few data points with you here as we really think about the opportunities we have at hand to address a big social issue. Voters believe Black and Hispanic Americans are discriminated against, and a majority, 56%, holds the view that American society is racist. Another point from their survey, Americans of all ages and races share significant concerns about discrimination. And so we can see again how this issue has become so front and center for us and so much opportunity to address it as we go. In addition to the issues that we're dealing with in our society, we also have some macro trends that we're all seeing that I think of as the consumer zeitgeist. And this is language that really comes out of the market research world as well, in really thinking about kind of this consumer age that is defining so much of our lives. And when I was thinking about the current mood of the consumer, and as we think about our lived experience, especially in the United States, this language really struck me from a piece I read recently. It said, beyond merely depressing sales, the crisis has uprooted the way people work, learn, relax, and consume. Now, recognizing, of course, there are many, many underlying issues of privilege here. Some of us, like me, have immense privilege to work from home or work from an office with safe social distancing that other people don't have. And so we always want to make sure we're being mindful of that. We are seeing an increasing expectation from polls conducted by a number of different organizations that individuals are expecting brands to do right, that we're looking for companies and others to do right by their employees and their communities during COVID-19. And as we look out to the future with expectations of doing the right thing, I don't see that going away anytime soon. And of course, we are increasingly kind of defining our lives not only by remote work and learning, social, or I prefer the word physical distancing, right? We want social connections and physical distance. We're certainly seeing more consumer introspection, right? Folks cutting back on spending, really thinking, do I really need that? Is that a way that I really can express my values? How do I really want to be thinking about my life today? And of course, we're all using technology more and more as much as we can. These charts, hopefully you can see these okay. I did some screen shots yesterday to pull them up for you. This came out of a recent piece in the McKinsey Quarterly, really interesting to pull down if you want to go grab this. And I will make sure to share this deck with you after the session today. But I was struck by the fact that we have achieved like 10 years of growth in the way that we are engaging online in 3 months' time. And that graph at the top left is certainly striking, isn't it? The extent to which we are really have made that leap online. And it's also really important for us to be thinking about the ways in which we as consumers are changing our behaviors and what we're doing now and what we're expected to do as we move into the future, with behaviors really kind of cementing or rooting in. And more of us are engaging with brands and opportunities that we didn't engage with before. And so each of us leading organizations, if we're nonprofits or businesses or government agencies, need to be thinking about the way people are engaging and how we can meet where they are. This quote came from the McKinsey piece yesterday too, and I thought I'd read it aloud so we can be thinking about this a little bit, because it goes right into our work with our bounce back plans, especially related to goal 2 around your business model. And this is exactly from them: business reimagination. The current crisis has created an impetus for companies, for organizations, for government agencies to reimagine their business models and quickly adapt their offerings and operations to temporary conditions like lockdowns, travel restrictions, and workplace closures. They might begin by refreshing their understanding of their customers' expectations and needs and rethinking their value propositions in line with those priorities. Similarly, as leaders, we can reconsider where new sources of growth might be found beyond current offerings. And I would suggest that maybe taking their language a little bit further, what I keep thinking about, colleagues, and we'll talk about this today, is this isn't one and done, right? We're not going to kind of see this through in 6 months and then we bounce back into the lives that we had. We need to be prepared for COVID-19 and its implications to be with us for a while. And so as we think about business model reimagination, I'm going to suggest to you that now is the time, right? What are we waiting for? We need to find ways to make these pivots now. And I know many of you on the webinar with us today are already thinking about that. And so as we think about recovery, right, we just had some striking economic data come out today. We knew that the contraction the last quarter was going to be significant, and it was at almost 33%, the greatest retraction kind of on record. And we know that corporations, nonprofits, businesses, and government agencies were really bracing for a prolonged downturn. And in part because COVID-19 doesn't show any signs of abating. And as we're seeing with people from other countries around the world, that there is a resurgence often with this virus. It's a really nasty virus, isn't it? And its ability to reinfect and things until we have a vaccine and treatments is really something we need to be thinking through. And what I keep reading as well is that we have to keep finding ways to kind of manage risk. How can we be engaging in ways that are thoughtful about risk, but yet give us opportunities to regain our lives around our educations, work, life, etc. And so what to do when the tried and true is inadequate to the task? We need to discover new landmarks and blaze a fresh trail. And that's really where I think we are, colleagues and strategists, is we're really blazing a new trail and looking for those markers to guide us. And again, 5 months in, we know more than we did back in March about not only COVID-19, but this crisis trifecta. Many of you are probably aware of VUCA. This is a concept, as you can see, that comes out of the U.S. Army War College. I've included a few references for you here. If you quickly Google, you can go learn a little bit more about it. And VUCA is really an interesting concept to be thinking about as we consider the implications of COVID-19 and the kind of 3 or 4 dimensional complexity that we're all dealing and living with today. And the letters I thought are kind of interesting to read aloud and think about them in the 2 categories that they're in. We've got volatility and uncertainty. Is something predictable? And then we have complexity and ambiguity. Is it knowable? And I don't know about you all, but I know for me, when we really just started kind of living into the realities of COVID-19 and everything that it meant, especially back in the March and April timeframes, the complexity and the ambiguity sure seemed high too, right? It seemed like we were all caps, VUCA, everything almost working kind of in parallel, making it very difficult to navigate. As we get into this more, and as I hear more from leaders, what I'm hearing from folks is the biggest challenge is around uncertainty, right? We certainly do have volatility, as we've seen today and other days, not only in the stock market, but in other news and events as we look at the kind of the flare-ups of COVID-19 and flare-ups of other challenges around our country and around the world. So volatility is certainly there, but the uncertainty, I think, is often still the biggest challenge many of us have in kind of figuring out how to navigate this new kind of normal that we're in. And one of the things that I wanted to suggest to you today is that perhaps we need to reframe how we think about uncertainty, because in fact, we may have more certainty than we thought. And that we're dealing now with a certainty that's less stable than we're accustomed to. It is more of this kind of jigs and jags as we go. And that what we know today with certainty, I think in many ways, is that this virus is going to be with us for a while. We'll talk about that today. And until we have a vaccine that's widely adopted, we are likely going to be living with the level of uncertainty that we have. And so might we start to think about that as certainty? Not that it gives us comfort, but because it helps us adapt and adjust as we move to the future together. And so as we move forward as strategists, again, we're always looking for these new landmarks, right? And seeing what kind of a trail we might be blazing and how we can be looking to others to see what it is that they're figuring out, right? Each of us has different strengths as we're able to kind of scan and get a sense of what's going on around us. And what we're having to do, and we see this again real time every day, is look for markers like public health indicators, federal policies, supply chains, which are getting increased attention again as vaccine manufacturers are looking to gear up production once they get through testing, and manufacturing capacity. And I know what schools have been considering reopening, right? We've seen this lived experience, especially over the last few weeks. as schools, colleges, and universities are trying to figure out, can we get enough tests for our teachers and our students? What will it mean to implement those tests? How quickly can we get the results back? Those sorts of things. And those kinds of markers will have an impact on our lives, I believe, over the next at least year. And hopefully some of those markers will go down in importance and other new ones might come up, but there are the markers I think that we need to be considering as we go. Back to my point about uncertainty, right, and the extent to which so many of us have been feeling that things are uncertain is, are we dealing with the spike on wave 1? We haven't even seen wave 2 of the virus yet. And there's still, again, so much we don't know about who has it, how easily it's transmitted, and a growing interest, of course, in what does immunity mean, and how long will we have it, right, as we go. And so we are dealing, of course, with the reality that we've not had a national strategy in the United States to produce and procure everything that we need. And we certainly have not had national kind of cohesive messages around what to do and how to move forward. And this is certainly impacting our abilities to navigate as we go, as we're figuring out, again, for ourselves in our own communities, for our own families, our own organizations, what to do. And so what struck me that culture didn't just eat strategy for breakfast. It's been eating our lunch too, right? As we think about the implications of culture, the will I wear a mask or not kinds of personal decisions that are being made, those elements of our culture are really impacting whatever strategies we might put in place as we go. And so we'll want to be mindful of that, because it's not just how does culture impact my organization internally, my internal culture, but how do we think about kind of this national culture that we have, and how can we as strategists find ways to adopt and support cultural change, right, to secure the kind of markers in the future that we're all looking for, with reduced volatility, right, reduced uncertainty, and a path forward. Now, this best case scenario for Colorado, colleagues, was introduced back in April. Not that long ago now, right? And what's interesting as we read through this list, and then we'll give a quick update, is to understand, quite frankly, how much has already changed and whether or not things are going to happen the way we thought they would. But when we think about kind of what's going on for us, we're really dealing with all of these different factors that are here. And as we've thought about physical distancing, right, personal protection, those pieces, especially the personal protective equipment, was such a big deal as we first started living with all this. Still looking to learn more about testing, right? Not only diagnostic tests for the presence of COVID, but also the antibody tests for exposure. And of course, tests are moving forward in both of those areas. We've been looking at treating, right? Do we have effective treatments in place? Tracking and tracing, isolating and monitoring, supply chains, and a vaccine. And of course, there have been efforts across the country in different cities like New York and other places to do more of the tracing and the tracking, right, of really kind of trying to beef up our public health workforce, if you will, to get out and be able to interact with folks when they have been exposed, so we can kind of cut down that exposure rate as we go. And lots of effort very early to try to create mobile hospitals and other kinds of facilities to help isolate and take care of folks that were exposed to COVID-19 and became sick. Of course, we don't hear about that as much anymore beyond what's happening in our hospitals, at least here in the US. So again, interesting things to be thinking about as they have shifted just since April. And we know with our crisis trifecta, it's really revealed a number of really incredible disparities that we have in our country. And we've known these are there, right? And it's, I think, inspiring us to do more to address them. Not only do we have economic uncertainty, but we know we have economic disparities. We have social justice issues, as we have been seeing play out in real time in protests across the country. We have digital divide, significant impacts there, as kiddos that were sent home to homeschool perhaps didn't have access to even learn, right, because they didn't have a computer or high-speed internet access. We know we have health disparities. Those have been laid bare by COVID-19. And of course, we have issues with racism, and now a kind of growing call for anti-racism approaches. And all of this, of course, means colleagues that our families, our individuals, or our colleagues are stressed and strained in ways that we haven't experienced before, especially collectively. And increasing research coming out about the impacts of isolation, both, for example, on older adults as well as teenagers, and especially teenage girls, and what this means for us in terms of our abilities, not only to cope, but to live kind of vital and active lives. And so I think it's time to kind of step back and suggest that, you know what, best case scenario, unfortunately, bye-bye, right? It's not going to happen the way that I think the governor and others had thought it might happen earlier in the pandemic, because of a number of factors, in addition to, or not, how do I want to say this, inspired or influenced, of course, by the cultural issues I raised earlier. And so as we think about a critical path, I'm going to start here in the middle and kind of the lime green. I think we're realizing over time, of course, herd immunity, you know, probably either not the right way to go or not going to happen. And I have read studies, and you might have as well, when you start looking at the number of people in our country that would have to get sick in order for us to reach herd immunity, I mean, the numbers are staggering, right? Which means the heightened emphasis around vaccines. And of course, wonderful that not only in our country, but around the globe, there's this race to develop vaccines, which of course would need to be implemented widely and hopefully be effective, and quite effective, in treating us. And of course, with health disparities and other issues, we have to make sure that they work for everybody too, right? And so we know we're dealing again back to not the best case scenario with a number of issues that are impacting our critical path. As we keep hearing about almost on a daily and weekly basis, our testing is just not adequate, right? It's not fast enough, and we can't do enough of it. And I think what we're seeing is, you know, the NBA and others might be able to get testing like in a day, but can your school district get that? Probably not. And so the gulf between the haves and the have-nots around testing, I think, is very evident now, and has implications for how we move forward in our communities. We don't have effective treatments yet. Again, antibody-based treatments are moving through trials, and so we'll continue to keep an eye out for those. Personal protective equipment. Remember back in the day, we're all like making gloves or masks out of like old socks, right? Trying to DIY or MacGyver that kind of stuff. The personal protective equipment challenge seems to be over, and we seem to be able to get what we need there, enough Lysol spray and all of that. Tracing and tracking, again, not yet, right? We've got some communities are moving further with that, and we're able to deploy the resources on that. But in most of our communities, we don't really know who has it and how it's spreading and how to safeguard our own health. Isolating and monitoring, I put a couple question marks here for us because, again, we don't hear as much about this. We do hear advice to isolate if you have been exposed, but it's not like we're putting folks in a special kind of a hospital or healthcare facility to stop isolation. We're still really isolating at home. And as we've seen in communities where we've got larger families, especially extended families living close-knit households, that's really difficult. And so we're, of course, seeing spread in family units, which is really unfortunate. Still have issues with a broken supply chain, right? We can't get quite enough of what we need here or there. And we've seen instances of governors and others really trying to kind of rally and address those issues as we go. I do think as we move forward, again, as we look into kind of manufacturing of a vaccine and other key elements, even as we're seeing with testing, the supply chain issues are something for all of us to be mindful of, and again, engage as advocates with our elected officials and others to see how we can get what we need. We know, of course, we've had tests of our medical capacity. We've seen that across the country from New York State now down to key portions of Texas. We've seen the stresses and strains in other communities as well. And so it's something, again, to keep an eye on. So lots to think about, right? It almost is takes my breath away as we try to kind of grapple with all of this. And that's why, at least for me, and when I get to provide you with little tidbits of wisdom, what I encourage you to do, colleagues, is to continue to keep your eye on 2022, right? If we look at the second half of 2020, it's still going to be a tough slog, isn't it? As we figure out how to reopen schools, stresses and strains on families if kiddos can't go back to school full time, which I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing many stories of kids going back to school full time, at least with the plans right now. We, of course, don't know what our teachers in our schools will do when the virus flares up and they have to make choices and figure out how to isolate folks. And so as we think that through and we think out into early 2021, at this point, I would say as a strategist and somebody who looks at trends, I don't see anything yet that tells me early 2021 is going to be much different right than now. Even with the change in the White House, if that happens, and not getting political at all. But many of the things that are at play will continue to be at play for a while. And so back to my point of, I know we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, that it feels a bit herky-jerky, right? Like we keep going a bit back and forth. What I'm going to suggest is that while we might not like it, and it's not our preference, that there is a bit of a through line that's emerging. That we have a sense of what this kind of new reality looks like for the near term, and how we can find, if not comfort in that, the recognition that if this is what we're going to be dealing with for the near-term future, we've got to do our planning and our redesign around that reality as we look into 2022. And so, my encouragement to all of you is reinvent the wheel, right? It's time. It's time. And I think we need to give ourselves permission, right? Kind of unbridled permission to say, you know what, we've got to figure out what's next in ways that are bold and audacious, and perhaps what we never expected. How can we start to do that now? So, colleagues, as we pivot and prepare, as I have been suggesting to you all since March, that it's time to keep an eye on 2022. I know many of you have been doing scenario planning and looking again at kind of best case, worst case, most likely. I'll be honest, it was sobering for me to realize, Carla, best case isn't happening. We're really to the most likely case, right? And sometimes our most likely is more worst case than we hoped for. But we just have to kind of lean into that as leaders and as strategists and organizational builders and find ways to move that forward. And so we keep learning, right, adapting and finding ways to move forward. Again, if we have our eye on a longer time horizon for 2022, what I'm going to be encouraging you to do in our time together today is to think through, given these realities, and if you kind of lean into the assumption I shared with you that what is going on now may be going on, maybe defining our world into, let's say, spring or summer of next year, right? Then that I think can free us to think about what it is we want to create and have in 2022 and find a way to move ourselves forward to make that a reality. I'm not sugarcoating it, please know that, and I'm not saying it's not going to be easy. But I think we have to get beyond this kind of living through this kind of mode to envisioning the next normal, because it will be different. And especially when we look at the changes in consumer behavior and the lasting impact of this crisis trifecta, kind of preparing for what's next and doing that now is really essential. And so as we think about pivoting and preparing, again, this is really what we've been living with this last period of time. And again, just as we've been talking through, as we think about scenarios, or kind of some of those, I wish we had more best case kind of issues kind of rising to the top for us, but we do need to just keep thinking about how this is going to, impact us and how we're going to need to pivot and prepare. Now, I know many of you on the webinar with us today are with organizations that are public serving, right? And you've had to make tough choices about how, not only how many people can be in your facility, but what you can even offer that might have been your tried and true in the past. And again, colleagues, as we think about the way consumers are kind of engaging online, as we think about ways to address social equity issues, as we think about ways to be a silver lining for others, my hope is to inspire you to kind of think through how your organization can meet those challenges in ways that are true to your mission and help us achieve the future that you want and that we want. And so your bounce back plan includes 9 goals. You can see them listed there on the right. Everything from redesigning your business model and creating that resilient strategy all the way through to some pandemic specifics. And what I thought we'd do today is spend a little bit more time on your first 2 goals around your strategy and your business model. Because again, my sense is that for each of us, and just know I do this for myself in my own work, is think about, Carla, where do you want to be in 2022? And what are the steps that you have to take now? Where can you make prudent investments? Where can you think about where your time goes, where your energy goes, and ways that you can motivate and inspire those around you to help make that happen. So we all can see ourselves there together. And so your bounce back plan, again, as I mentioned, includes 9 goals divided into 2 categories, kind of pivoting and preparing. Under the next normal, those preparing items were really largely COVID-19 specific. Again, this plan was created for you back in April. Amazing how much of it still is what we're living with, right? And so those are things we'll want to keep an eye on, testing and treatment, vaccines, etc. As we move forward. But again, today we'll focus in on the things that I highlighted for you in blue. And so let's spend a little time talking about a resilient strategy. And the term resilience has been coming up more, right? How do we kind of increase our own personal resilience? And I think as we think about our organizations and our supporting our staffs, engaging our boards and volunteers and our customers, right? The people whose life we serve through our mission, that we are finding ways to kind of buoy each other, right, and create a strategy that is resilient. And if we think back to the importance of kind of aligning strategy with culture, we have an opportunity as we think about a resilient strategy to kind of reinforce the positive elements of a resilient culture. And if, like me, you believe that we are going to be kind of dealing with this crisis trifecta into at least 2021, resilience is really essential, isn't it? So as we think about a resilient strategy, what we're really wanting to do here is really kind of step back and think about what matters the most to the people who matter most to us, our customers, right? The people whose lives we promise to impact through our mission. And so as we bring that kind of customer mindset to our work and thinking about, again, everything we've been talking about, what a wonderful opportunity to step back and think about how you can be of distinct and differentiated service to your customers in this time. Because they're dealing with all the things we just talked about. And as you find ways to meet them where they are and provide a bit of a silver lining and opportunities, that can go a long way to creating the strategy that will see you through into 2022. And when I talk about strategy, I'm really talking about the strategy for your organization, you know, your overall game plan, the strategy that really sets a clear sense of objective and where you're clear about kind of the scope in which you're going to work, who you're serving and who you're not, what you're doing and what you're not, and how you can leverage what I call your differentiation zone. That proclamation of your distinction in the marketplace that you can leverage the heck out of, and you need to leverage the heck out of to ensure your success into the future. There's never been a more important time to be differentiated in the marketplace. Folks are distracted, we're busy, lots of things are tugging at our heartstrings or in our heads and our time. And so if you want me to be engaging with you, then you need to be thinking about what matters most to me and how you can make that a reality that serves your mission, right? And so your resilient strategy is something that you're going to need to touch point on a regular basis, because again, we know, given the uncertainty that we do have, we need to keep looking towards not only 2022, but you can even increment it back a little bit and say, was there anything we need to do over the near term to get us where we want to go by 2022? Again, delivering on our mission for our customers. And so this is what that goal looks like with this wonderful visual illustration that my friend Lydia Hooper created for us. And then we have visual illustrations of each of your 9 bounce back goals. And so we have a chance, and we need to reassess our competitive environment, right? Things are changing all the time. We need to be monitoring those forces with the greatest potential to shape or drive your future, right? Talked about the pandemic, the economic and the social crisis. We also, again, have the customer zeitgeist, right? These broad consumer trends that are impacting people. And so those are probably the ones to be paying the most attention to, and really then be listening for the signal through the noise to identify those that have the biggest implications for your organization. And then to say, what might we do about that, right? As you set your strategy for the future. Scenario planning might be helpful to you as you think through options and choices. And you may pursue one strategy and find in a few months you got to dust off another one. And that's just fine, because that's the kind of real-time agility that we need right now as we find ways to be resilient almost every day. If you follow along with me in my blogs, you know that last week I talked about the need to really be thinking through kind of how we pep each other up and pep talks, and that I do give myself a pep talk every day. You probably do too, and sometimes a few times during the day to make sure I can keep my own eye on the prize as we go. Colleagues, this is a visual of your bounce back plan goal 2, again, really pivoting into 2022. And this is, again, our call to action of reinventing the wheel, i.e. reinventing your business model. I don't think, I don't want to say something too broadly. Let me say this. It behooves each of us to consider what the world will look like in 2022, how our customers and our stakeholders will engage with us, and design the business model for that next normal, and to begin to implement that business model now. My biggest concern for all of us is that we wait too long to act, that we spend down our reserves, we're too hesitant to make changes because we're hoping that 2021 will look like 2019. And most likely it won't, right? And so if you have been kind of counting on kind of in-person services to bounce back to where they were, and that you could dust off your programs and services from February of 2020, just want to be advising you to step back and think about that. And again, finding out what is most beneficial to your customers and how you can deliver your mission impact given the realities of what's facing them today, and how you can begin to find ways to monetize, right? We all have to find ways to make money. And quite frankly, our dollar amounts likely won't have as many zeros on the back end as they used to, right? I might not have a $5,000 project. I might have a $500 project, or I might go out and find a way to make $5 instead of $500. That's just kind of where we are. And those of us that were in leadership roles during the recession of 2008, 2009, 2010, we know how to do this, right? Kind of dust ourselves out and figure this out again. But I want to encourage you to, again, be reinventing your business model now so that you can start putting it into place to serve you and your customers as well as you can through the end of this year and into next year. So again, kind of to the end of your bounce back plan, that's a quick tour of those top 2 goals, which again, I think are probably the most important to be thinking about. So I wanted to see here if anybody has any questions or comments before we wrap up. We'll be able to wrap up a little bit early today, which is always a positive for folks. So any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or we can do some Q&A if anybody has anything. If not, we'll keep going. I wanted to let you know these are the tools that I've created for you. We've got a range of free to low-cost tools to help you bounce back, especially as you pull your teams together and rally your board, your volunteers and your staff. Created a video series that might be of interest, but especially we have free tools. And so you can find these on our website at differentiationzone.com /bounce back plan. So you'll go find us out there. And so welcome to the new avant-garde, right? It takes a few of us to blaze the trail with courage and conviction, shining a light for others. And so I invite you to join me in the new avant-garde. And please let me know if you would like to engage with me through our blog, or if you'd like additional webinar resources, happy to bring them to you. And I think other than that, this is my final slide. So if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. And please know I am here for you. Thank you so much. Oh, good. We have a question. Oh, Sue asked, as consultants, what's the best service philosophy we can offer our nonprofit client? Sue, what I keep thinking about is, well, there's kind of two sides of it for me. One is being proactive and how to kind of step out in grace and courage, even when we're uncertain about what to do. I think being kind of proactive is really essential. And number two, it's been my kind of personal mantra, is to be the silver lining. Find ways to be a silver lining for somebody else. That might be your staff, your volunteers, your customers and others, to find ways to add a bit of positivity to the world. So I think those two, because I think as consultants, what I hear from other consultants is our clients are counting on us more and more, right, to be thought leaders, I think to be kind of emotional anchors, and to really be that kind of the wind beneath others' wings, to be there with grace and courage to help support them in leading in what is a challenging time. So that's what I would suggest for that. Thank you for asking. Do you have a good example of an organization that has rethought its business model? Becky, I do, and this was in my blog this week, and I've got it, it's up on my website. I'm hearing more and more from, especially organizations in arts and culture, that are finding ways to kind of retool their business models in real time. Bobby Walker, who's on with Walker Fine Art Gallery, has pivoted her business model in real time to offer a really robust online offering to complement what they can do in the gallery. So I saw that example as well. Others have examples of rethought business models. Anyone else there? And I think also, Becky, my blog from this week, and then also from the last few weeks, I try to share examples of organizations that are making interesting pivots. In some cases, it can be interesting to look at folks in other industries. I actually think the work that United Airlines is trying to do in its partnership with Lysol and the Cleveland Clinic is really interesting, in being a leader in really ensuring kind of cabin safety and a healthy travel experience. They might be interesting to look at as well. Anything else today, colleagues, before I let you go? All right. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to engaging with you soon. And if I can be a resource, please let me know. And I'm happy to send the slide deck to you, and we'll let you know when we have the webinar available to you all as well. Thank you. Bye.